Hi, my name is Michel Ramirez, songwriter, musician, producer of the Convolution M project. Today we will discuss the process used to create a new Convolution M song named Ignorant Nature from the new EP. So let's start with the principal idea. The principal idea of the song, it's created by a guitar melody. This guitar melody is by using tapping technique. So let's try it. So if you can see, um, this melody also reveals the harmony that is inside the song. So we can analyze the harmony, and we can see that the first chord of the melody is the next one. This chord can be considered a B flat major 7 chord. That is going to be our first chord. The second chord is this one. This can be considered a D suspended 2 with the B flat bass, something like that. And finally, the last chord is this one. This chord can be considered an A major without the fifth. So we have B flat major 7, D suspended 2 with B flat in the bass, and A major. The time signature of the melody could be counted as a 9/4, but I prefer to do it as one bar of 4/4 and other of 5/4. So let's try it. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this was the starting point. Let's go to DAW to see the song's production and how I mix the different tracks. So we are inside the DAW, and now we are going to check the production and mixing of the song. First of all, we're going to see the sections. The first section is the intro 1, then the verse 1, verse 2, complementary section, transition, main section, and outro. We can see here the signature of the song, that is a 4/4 with a 5/4, as we discussed before. And this is entirely in all the song, right? Let's see how many tracks I have here. First one, I have the vocal recordings. Then I have the guitar recordings. They are the purple ones. Then I have the red ones that are the drums that I designed, MIDI drums. Then the bass is the purple one again. And finally, all the other instruments, virtual instruments like mallets, strings, effects. All right. Firstly, let's see how I made the vocal production. I have a vocal bus. Mono vocals are here inside this bus. I have 2 tracks of vocals. And I also have another bus that is the stereo bus that is there. And let's see how the first vocal, the principal vocal sounds.
Soy el ayer, lo que nunca fue y nunca será.
So as you heard, the main voice is in the mid of the mix. Now let's try to listen to vocals only isolated.
Soy el ayer, lo que nunca fue y nunca será.
As you can hear, there are a lot of processing on the voice. Most of the processing is doing on buses, in parallel buses, and the most relevant one is the vocal delay. But for the vocal delay, I use the H delay of waves, as you can see here, and also a compressor of waves that is here. Also, it's important to understand the buses from reverb. I use two types of reverbs. And also in the vocal, I have these automations that can eliminate the sibilances of some of the T's and P's that I have when I pronounce the words. As I said, most of the time I do two channels for each principal vocal. So let's listen to the second channel right now.
Soy el ayer, lo que nunca fue y nunca será.
As you heard, the second channel vocal has the presence of the vocal, and the first channel has the body of the vocal. So I try to mix both. Then I have the stereo vocals that I use for the sides. I use S1 imager for waves to widen more the vocals. Let's listen how it sounds.
Soy el ayer, lo que nunca fue y nunca será.
Now let's go to the guitar section. The guitar section is kind of similar with the vocals. So let's see some of the guitars for the main section. We can see also a monobass. Let's see how it sounds. The approach is similar with the vocals. I have the first one that gives the body. This first distortion has this Logic vintage British amp emulation. The second one managed the presence of the guitar, so the amp emulation has more treble on it. Finally, let's listen the guitar in the mix.
Nunca existo. Me arrepiento una vez, me arrepiento otra vez. Soy el ayer, me limito. Nunca existo, yo no me.
Now let's move to the drum sections. All the drums are MIDI, and I have different channels per section. So let's see how are my drums. We can go inside the main section drum. You can see all our MIDI mapping, and I try to have different velocities and also to have some swing, not be on the line all the time. See how this drum sounds. The main plugin used in the drums is Machine by Native Instruments. I have here all my sounds. So the kick, snare, hi-hat, and crash are here. Also, I process each sound with different effects. I use, for example, for the kick API 500 for the EQ, and I combine this EQ with another waves plugin EQ, that is the Tech EQ. In the case of the snare, I add reverb to it and also a bit of delay. The delay gives it texture and personality. And finally, for the crash, I also use a reverb and an API to EQ it. Let's move to the bass section. I also have different types of bass. So let's listen to the bass that I use in the main section of the song. As you can hear, this bass sound was not made by only one bass. There are a combination of basses. Let's see what is inside the bass. The main component of the bass is the native instrument Monarch. I use this analog synth emulation to create my bass sound. I use 2 oscillators, and I have also control of the contour and the filter, a resonance filter. So, and I add noise to it. So the bass by itself sounds like this. Now let's listen to the other bass. You can hear that this bass has more distortion than the first one and more body. And the last one, this bass gives the low frequencies without any distortion. Moving to other section, I also have some transition effects that I create reversing the sound, for example, of the guitar like this. I use these types of effects to change for one section to other section. Let's listen to it inside the mix.
Soy el ayer.
I also use other synths that create effects like this to generate some texture in the mix. I also create some effects with basses, like this one. Moving to the last section, I have here all the synths, strings, brasses, everything I need for another virtual instruments. Let's listen to the strings. Now let's move to the mallets that I use in this verse. Stereo mallets. There are some vocal leakage there because of the reverb. I also have here a fluid bass. This is for the bass sound in this section. Let's listen to it in the mix. I use this fluid bass also in the outro, but I combine it with other two fluid basses to create a more wide bass effect. And let's listen to it. As you can hear, the bass is very big in this section. That's why it's a combination of three synth basses. Finally, let's move to the mixing references. I use this type of references to match my mix and try to be sure that everything is sounding in the correct position and with the correct EQ. So let's listen one of these references. I can know you forever. This was Stuck Between by Riverside. So most of the time I compared a similar style of song with my son. And let's listen now my song. Another trick that I use for my mixing is to put a channel EQ in the stereo master output, so I can here select certain kind of frequencies, range of frequencies, and I can listen my song in those frequencies. Let's listen the bass, the low frequencies. If you can listen, most of the frequencies here are the vocal, the bass, and the kick. That means that it's a very clean low end. Now let's move to another section. The frequencies that are between 200 Hz and 1 kHz. Also, it's important because most of the time it's saturated for all the instruments. Let's listen to it. You can clearly listen to the vocal and no any saturation. Let's put the filters more strict. Now we are listening only to that section, and you can hear a very clear vocal without any saturation. Let's move to the frequency range between 1 kHz and 2 kHz. Here the vocal and the guitar are the most prominent ones. And let's move to the 2 kHz, 6 kHz section. Here you can listen to the drums. And it's important that the drums have here an image for the small speakers. And finally, the last frequency range is between 6 kHz and 10 kHz or 20 kHz. So that's how I try to mix my songs usually. And finally, I use some compression. I use the plugin, the compressor plugin of Logic.
Una vez, me arrepiento otra vez. Soy el ayer. Me limito, nunca existo. Yo no me vuelvo a herir.
Some professional mixing engineers recommends to not have more than 2 dBs of compression. That's what I try. And finally, I have a limiter here. And for the mastering process, I use Ozone to EQ differently the mids and the sides. These are my configurations. And basically that's all. Thank you very much for watching the video. Let's listen to the song Final Mix one more time.